Welcome everyone to the Free Speech Movement Cafe Educational Program Series. We're so excited to have such a big crowd out here tonight. I know it's kind of rainy outside, so thanks for braving the weather. And we're also excited to be hosting the Mayor of Berkeley this evening. Before we get started, I just want to introduce myself and introduce the program. My name is Jean Ferguson, and I work at the University Library that hosts this series. The Free Speech Movement Cafe Educational Programs Committee has been offering programs since 2001. So I want to take a moment also and thank my intrepid committee who has put together publicity and the programming for this and worked with Daniel Fields from the Progressive Students Association to plan this program. The goals of the program, of the educational program series, are to generate critical discussion about historical and contemporary social activism or about other important social, political, or cultural issues, and to encourage student participation and leadership in educational programming for social activism. And I would say this program definitely fits that bill. This year we've had speakers from the ACLU about voting rights, Helpful Villages that advocates for seniors to age in place. And tonight we have the honor of hosting the mayor. So to introduce the mayor, I'd like to present Daniel Fields from the Progressive Students Association, who has co-sponsored this program this evening.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Fields, and like Jean referenced, I'm a board member of the Progressive Students Association here at UC Berkeley. And I just want to thank all of you at the Free Speech Movement Educational Series program for helping us through this. This is going to be a wonderful event tonight. We've all been really excited about it. Before I introduce the mayor, I just want to give a little background as to our club. We started out in the fall of 2015 as UC Berkeley Students for Bernie. Shortly after we founded, we became the largest campus chapter of the Bernie Sanders for Democratic presidential nominee campaign. Following the campaign, we transformed into the Progressive Student Association. Taking Bernie's advice to heart, we directed our efforts toward getting progressive politicians, such as Mayor Arreguin, elected on the local level. During the fall and spring semesters of the academic year, we campaigned for progressive candidates up and down the ballot. Measure U1 for affordable housing was passed, and as well as getting Mayor Arreguin elected, and now we have a progressive supermajority, on the Berkeley City Council, which is really exciting. If anyone's interested in joining the Progressive Student Association, we're having a meeting this Thursday in Barrows 175 for 8 to 9 p.m. Some issues that we're working on right now is getting a ban on tossing out expired food, as well as divestment from Wells Fargo. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce the mayor. In November 2016, Jesse Arreguin was elected the first Latino mayor of Berkeley. Prior to this win, Mayor Arreguin expanded affordable housing, helped establish the minimum wage, and fought for tenants, immigrants, and civil liberties as a city council member. It is also worth to note that during his campaign, Mayor Arreguin was endorsed by Senator Bernie Sanders, among many other progressive politicians. So without further ado, here to speak on what it means to be a progressive mayor in the Trump era, Mayor Jesse Arreguin.
Well, first I want to thank the organizers for putting this event on and the Progressive Student Association for sponsoring. And here we are at the Free Speech Movement Cafe. And I think it's important to first talk about freedom of speech during these very difficult times, particularly given what has happened in our community this past weekend over the past couple months. Certainly, our commitment to freedom of speech is being challenged by outside groups that are coming into our city and using the concept of freedom of speech to engage in violence and vandalism. And as the mayor of Berkeley, I'm deeply committed to respecting the right of everyone in our community and from outside of our community to be able to express their opinions, whatever they are, in a peaceful way, and to have our police support the right of people to peacefully assemble, while at the same time protecting public safety. And I'm sure we'll talk about this later on in the question and answer period. November 8th, 2016. It's a day that literally changed the direction of our country and our city. And after 14 years, Berkeley elected a new mayor. And the first progressive mayor of the city of Berkeley in decades, the youngest mayor in a century, and the first Latino elected mayor in the city's history. This election was the culmination of years of work by progressive activists for a change of leadership and a return to Berkeley's values. And not only was I honored to be elected the new mayor of Berkeley, but we swept 3 seats on the Berkeley City Council, resulting in a progressive majority for the first time in years. And this was the outcome of an incredible grassroots movement. We had a campaign of hundreds of volunteers that canvassed every corner of the city, from the top of Marin Avenue up in the hills to the flatlands. We spoke to thousands of residents, and many of the people that were involved in this campaign not only included longtime residents of Berkeley, but student leaders. And I want to take a minute to acknowledge the work of the Progressive Student Association, the Cal Berkeley Democrats, Soli Alpert, Matthew Lewis, who were really instrumental, Raja Southern, instrumental in my campaign and really mobilizing the student vote. And not surprisingly, we won, I believe it was over 60% of the campus vote because of the strong campaign on campus and in mobilizing students to vote. And I actually was at the polling places near campus, Unit 3 and Unit 1 on election day, and I was really amazed at the number of students that turned out to vote. And oftentimes we hear that young people are not engaged or not interested in our civic process, and we had an overwhelming number of students that participated not just in the national election, but in the local election. And as a result, we have new leadership representing the city of Berkeley. But it was an incredible campaign that we ran. When we started the campaign over a year ago, most political observers said that we had no chance of winning, that my main opponent was going to sweep into office. He was the endorsed candidate of the outgoing mayor. He was a longtime city council member. He had deep pockets and support of developers in the business community. And through running a strong citywide grassroots campaign that really spoke to the values of our community, we won an overwhelming victory on November 8th. The mood at the Ed Roberts campus, which was where we held our election night party, was electric. We had over 300 to 400 people in the room who were excited about what we have accomplished, which is something we have long dreamed of, really having a progressive majority on the city council. But at the same time, that same evening, Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. And while Berkeley moved to the left, our country moved to the right. And while I was overjoyed to win the election, it was a bittersweet night. I was shocked, honestly, and incredibly saddened that Trump could win the election. I think this is something that many of us did not expect to happen, and what that really meant for the future of the country. And I think everyone in the room was really conflicted with those emotions. When I ran for mayor, my focus was on addressing some of the long-standing problems facing our city: affordable housing, homelessness, gentrification, displacement, equity in our schools, and environmental leadership. And I ran on a platform of making Berkeley work for everyone and bringing new dynamic leadership to City Hall. And so I was excited to bring my energy and ideas to chart a new course for our city, but I did not expect to face such significant challenges due to the new federal administration and a need to fight and protect the basic values and rights of our citizens. And as a progressive mayor in the Trump era, there is an added responsibility to provide bold leadership and to be part of the resistance. Berkeley has a long history of progressive activism going back to the 1960s. This campus was the birthplace of the free speech movement, as evidenced right behind me, and the center of the anti-war movement. And that activism spread off campus into the Berkeley community and helped shepherd, years later, a new progressive city government that focused on community economic control, citizen participation, and social action. And Berkeley's progressive government, not only in the 1970s and 80s, not only helped bring about policies like rent control and community oversight of police, but made Berkeley the first city in the nation to divest from companies doing business with apartheid South Africa. Our leadership on international issues, economic and social justice, and environmental policy has inspired cities throughout the country. And Berkeley has the responsibility to be a progressive leader, and that is my goal as the mayor of Berkeley, to show how progressive solutions can address the challenges facing cities in the 21st century. And it is this political activism that drew me to UC Berkeley as a student. I have been committed to social justice my entire life. I am the son and grandson of farm workers, so political activism is in my DNA. And at a young age, I remember learning about the current events and social movements happening at the time, the fight against apartheid in South Africa, for democracy in China and other parts of the world, for farm workers' rights here in our country. And these social movements inspired me to get involved. At the age of 6 years old, I asked my parents to stay home from school to watch Nelson Mandela free from prison. And I remember that being a significant moment because after many decades of unjust imprisonment and a global movement for justice, we actually finally achieved an incredible victory. At the age of 9 years old, I became involved in the farm workers movement and helped rename a street in my hometown after my hero, Cesar Chavez. And so for the past 21 years, I've been an advocate for social change. And so when I was accepted to UC Berkeley 15 years ago, I knew this is where I belonged. I wanted to be in an environment where political discussion and activism was encouraged. And as a student, I became involved in the effort to create more student housing, working with the ASUC, the Berkeley Student Government, and I was eventually elected to the Rent Stabilization Board while a junior at Cal. In 2008, a year after I graduated from UC Berkeley, I became the first Latino and the youngest person elected to the Berkeley City Council. And during my 8 years on the council, I was an effective advocate for progressive change. We secured millions of dollars for affordable housing, we expanded tenant protections, we led a reform of police practices after the 2014 Black Lives Matter protests, and we helped revitalize our downtown. I ran for mayor because I was deeply concerned over the future of our city. With housing costs skyrocketing, more students and working families were being priced out of our city. And while Berkeley is a center of innovation, we also have one of the largest wealth gaps in the entire Bay Area. That's something that most people don't realize. And Berkeley also has the distinction, the unfortunate distinction, of having one of the biggest racial achievement gaps out of any public school system in the state of California, despite being a progressive, compassionate community. We also have major disparities on the basis of health, housing, and economic opportunity. So while at the same time we have these challenges, there also is an incredible opportunity to not just address these challenges, but to promote innovation and economic growth. So my focus since the election in November, in the 4 months I've been in office, which actually feels like it's been 4 years, but it's been an incredible experience, has not only been to address these challenges, but also those challenges being put forward by the Trump administration. Throughout the campaign, Donald Trump derisively attacked immigrants and committed to deporting millions of undocumented people, as well as construct a divisive border wall. One of the first acts I took as mayor-elect in November was to declare that Berkeley will remain a sanctuary city, despite the threats of cuts to federal funding by the new presidential administration. The potential impact of those cuts is around $12 million in federal grants, but we will not be bought so cheaply. And since President Trump signed his executive order on immigration, Berkeley has joined lawsuits challenging the constitutionality of this action, and my office has convened a task force bringing together city, university, Berkeley Unified School District, and other stakeholders to develop protocols, resources, and an action plan in the case of ICE activity in the Berkeley community. And we also are engaging Berkeley residents directly in those efforts, and I invite you to get involved. I believe our city must stand, now more than ever, for the values of equity, inclusivity, and justice. And that requires us to challenge the unconstitutional and unjust actions of the Trump administration. And some ways we have done that, and I'm proud that we have done so, is we became the first city in the United States to divest from companies that will construct the president's border wall. We passed a resolution directing our city staff to not participate in any Muslim registry. We've opposed the president's draconian budget, making deep cuts in the Environmental Protection Agency, the arts, social services, and while increasing funding for border security and the military. We're also looking at the issue, which the Progressive Student Association is championing, of divesting from our bank, Wells Fargo, in light of the many wrong actions, not only in ripping off customers, but also investing in the Dakota Access Pipeline and the prison industrial complex and immigration prisons. We've also led efforts around addressing homelessness, expanding tenants' rights, and affordable housing. So we are living in very troubling times. One tweet may set off a major war, and we know that we're in a very troubling time with threats of missile strikes by North Korea, and the president saying that he is going to respond with the bomb that was dropped on Afghanistan. Our presidential administration is full of conflicts and abuses of power, And so to that end as well, we've joined Alameda and the city of Richmond in calling on Congress to impeach President Trump due to violations of the emoluments clause and other abuses of power. So while we may be angry or sad over what's happening in our country, the only way we're going to change things is by taking action. My administration in City Hall is committed to speaking out and taking progressive action, but everyone has a social responsibility to get involved. One of the things I said on election night, as the results were coming in, not only in the local election, but the national election, is that now more than ever, Berkeley must be a beacon of hope in the darkness. And that is what we're committed to doing. Now more than ever, we must not be silent, but we must fight back. We must be part of the resistance. As the saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child. If you want to make a difference in your community, you cannot go it alone. You need the backing of a coalition. I was fortunate to be elected by a grassroots movement. It was this movement that brought together people under the common banner of progressive values. And now the major policies that are being brought forward are also being done through the input of those coalitions. So we welcome your input and your participation. We're working to end homelessness in Berkeley, to address the affordability crisis, to prevent the closure of our only emergency room, Alta Bates, and to maintain basic social services during very difficult budget times. The advocacy and energy of this campus, the Berkeley campus, has had an everlasting impact of not just on the city of Berkeley, but on our country. And now as we face some of the biggest challenges created by the Trump administration, it's going to take decades to undo the impact that this administration is having on our country and our world. The work that you do is more important than ever. In many of the discussions I've had with my constituents over the last several months since the election, I've visited our schools, I've visited many people in our community, there's a great deal of concern and fear for the future. But I am hopeful. I know that we are capable of forming strong, unbreakable coalitions and of leading the way. So let's rise together. Let's make it clear that we will not go silent into the night, but rather shine and be a beacon of hope during these difficult times. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions. So I guess I'll moderate the Q&A portion.
Thank you.
Sure.
If you can, elaborate on the procedures or ideas that you have if there is ICE activity in Berkeley, and how do we protect our undocumented residents?
It's a good question. So Berkeley is a sanctuary city, so that means as city policy that our police will not be involved in any investigation or enforcement of federal immigration law. And that also is directive to all of our city staff. So one of the things we're working now is actually developing protocols. What happens if an ICE agent comes to a public health clinic or to another city office and starts asking questions about an individual or about a group of individuals? Well, how do we respond? What kinds of warrants are appropriate for us to respond to and which ones aren't? And what do we do if somebody is detained? And how will we, and particularly if that person is a parent who has kids in our schools, how will we first, protect the kids that are in our Berkeley public schools? How will we deploy legal resources to help those individuals who are being investigated or being detained for enforcement of federal immigration law? So we're working on developing an action plan. Part of this will involve community education. And part of it, I think, will also involve developing sanctuary spaces, not just with our churches, but private individuals offering sanctuary in their own homes, which actually is a higher legal bar for an ICE agent to enter. So we're exploring all those options. We're working with legal defense providers. We're working with the university, with the school district, with Berkeley City College, with Barbara Lee's office, many different stakeholders. And I want us to be a sanctuary city, not just in name, but in actual action and practice. So that's one of the issues that I did not anticipate when I ran for office that we would be spending so much time addressing, but has been a focus of my administration. And for me, it's personal. I am the first Latino mayor. I'm certainly somebody that would be the target of an enforcement action just by the way I look. I'm the son of immigrants. Many of my people in my community are the ones that are being targeted and the ones that are being maligned and attacked by the presidential administration. So I feel as a Latino leader at this critical time, I have an even greater responsibility to speak out and to provide leadership on this important issue. We're fortunate to live in this part of the world, not just in Berkeley, but the Bay Area. We have mayors throughout the Bay Area that are very committed to being part of the effort to resist these actions by the administration on immigration. San Francisco, Santa Clara County, Berkeley, many other cities have joined in lawsuits challenging the constitutionality of these executive orders, and we will continue to fight back. Thank you. Yes.
So by responding to the Trump administration with so much resistance and hostility, has this led to more polarization within the Berkeley community? And if so, like, how would you respond, especially with the recent violence this past weekend?
I don't think it's led to polarization in the Berkeley community. It's kind of led to some broader polarization, because the people that have been engaged in these protests and sort of, I would characterize them as melees, honestly. They're not really from the city of Berkeley. There was an article that came out today that many of the people that were arrested are from other communities. There are people that came from outside of the Bay Area, particularly on the pro-Trump side, to participate. They want to make Berkeley an example. And this all started February 1st with the Milo incident, which definitely was my first test as a mayor. And certainly something we didn't expect. We didn't expect such a violent response from protesters. And the large number of black bloc people and the vandalism of property. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we need to continue to fight for the principle that we will protect freedom of speech and peaceful assembly. But when it crosses the line to violence, that's a different story. Violence is not free speech. Destruction of property and vandalism is not free speech. So unfortunately, it seems that, outside groups are coming into our city, particularly in light of the Milo incident, because that speaker was canceled, and want to make an example of Berkeley. And it's really testing our values, but we will continue to fight for the principle of freedom of speech and peaceful assembly, and balance that with the protection of public safety and property. So it's very challenging. These situations evolve. Our police are doing the best they can to protect themselves and to protect the community and to protect our businesses. And we're always learning and we're always evolving, and we'll continue to prioritize public safety.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for coming. I also wanted to talk about homelessness, which is not just a Berkeley problem, but a Bay Area problem. Oakland is probably worse, has worse issues than Berkeley and San Francisco. I was wondering if there's sort of a concerted effort among the mayors of these areas to work together to solve that, and what some of the solutions might be.
There has not been, but there is one starting. And one of the things I said in the campaign is that Berkeley, as much as we care about addressing poverty and ending homelessness, we alone can't solve the problem. We have to work regionally. It's really a regional and national problem. It's going to get worse, I hate to say it, with the cuts in funding in the HUD budget. There's a correlation to the increase in homelessness to the cuts in public housing that occurred during the Reagan administration. So I hate to say it, but I think we're going to see more and more people on our streets. So since I was elected mayor, I've been meeting with mayors from throughout the region, Mayor Schaaf in Oakland, the mayors of Emeryville, Albany, other communities, around what are things we can do collectively to create housing, to create navigation centers, because the population is not Berkeley specific, it's regional. One of the first acts I took as mayor and the new council took was facing a very rainy and cold season. We doubled the capacity of our emergency shelters and warming centers. And so that shelter is still open. And some of the people we're seeing are not just Berkeley people, they're from San Leandro, they're from Oakland. And so that's why it's more important that we work regionally. And we're going to need the help of the state, we need the help of the federal government to the extent that's possible, to provide additional resources to create housing, to create shelters, to expand mental health services. So regional coordination is very critical in that respect as well. Unfortunately, historically, there's been sort of a perspective of, well, that's my problem, and people have been kind of operating in silos, and there hasn't been a lot of interest in working more collaboratively. But I think we're at a point now where everyone recognizes that we got to change that approach. So we're working on it. And our county supervisor, Keith Carson, is working on trying to bring many leaders from Alameda County together to have that regional conversation. The county has to play a critical role in terms of service delivery, and so I think they're an important, and money too, and I think they're an important ally in this effort as well.
Thank you, Mayor, for coming to speak with us today. My question was mostly about, you mentioned that you wanted to emphasize public engagement within Berkeley about how to really make sure that the constituents are aware of what the mayor's office is doing, how they can get involved. So what kind of organizations have you been working with so far to kind of get this on the road, and also, just really how do you really want to engage with your constituents now and then moving forward?
Good question, and nice plug. I see you're wearing the Berkeley Group sweatshirt there. So we're working with the Berkeley Group. We're really happy to have your help to look at how we can better engage with the campus and city community to develop a sort of a civic engagement program. And we're working with a variety of stakeholder groups. I think, Berkeley is a city with many diverse constituencies, but one of the most important ones are students. They represent about 30% of the city's population, and oftentimes are not represented in City Hall. So as somewhat recent graduate of UC Berkeley about 10 years ago, I can't believe it's been 10 years, I'm very committed to representing the interests of students and young people, and oftentimes it's those people that are bringing the freshest ideas, the most innovative ideas, and are really kind of the people at the cutting edge of what makes our city government such a leader. So we're honored to work with the Berkeley Group and to work with the ASUC, to work with the Progressive Student Association, environmental groups, civil rights groups, and many different stakeholder groups. I believe that as policymakers, we need the input of not just residents, but we need the engagement of residents in helping make change happen.
First of all, I wanted to thank you, Mayor Arreguin, for coming to speak to us this evening. And so my question is, what do you think, as someone who became involved in local politics during your time as a student at Berkeley, what do you think are some of the most effective ways for students to become involved in local politics?
It's a good question. Well, there are many ways. Some of it is the work you're doing on campus and collaborating with the city. And we're doing that with the Progressive Student Association, we're doing that with the ASUC. But Berkeley has 35 boards and commissions. And I see Jeff Vincent, who's on the Planning Commission, is in the audience, which advise the City Council on a variety of policy issues. And so that's one opportunity for direct citizen engagement in helping shape city policy. Some of these commissions have quasi-judicial powers, meaning you approve permits for new projects, you help shape police practices. So we need young people, we need students to get involved in those commissions. We also are looking for students to work with us in our various city council offices as interns to work on policy projects. We have many projects that we're working on which directly align with, I think, a lot of the stuff happening on campus. So that's an opportunity as well. I think there are many ways. I mean, as a student, I worked with the ASUC as their director of local affairs and represented students at the city government. We worked on housing, safety, transportation issues. And so we need more students to get involved. And this is your city. This isn't just our city. Even though you may be here for 3 to 4 years or even longer, this is your city and you have a voice and you deserve to be heard. And I think that guy had a question as well.
Thanks again for coming to speak here. I just wanted to build off an earlier question just regarding students and representing students. I think one thing that is a big problem on this campus, if you ask any student who's here, is the issue of housing and affordable housing. That's something that stresses Berkeley students out quite a bit. And I'm wondering, to what extent does the city at that municipal level actually have control over mandating that housing be at an affordable level, or what is the extent of their power for that?
Well, anything that's built on university property is not within our jurisdiction. But the issue is the campus does not have the they don't have the financial resources to construct additional student housing due to their sort of budgetary challenges that they're facing. So they have been working in partnership with private developers through public-private partnerships to construct new student housing. The project on Bancroft Way at, I think it's Dana Street, is a P3 project. And so that's where the city and university relationship intersects. How can we streamline the process for projects on private property, not on university property, to facilitate student housing? How can we increase densities to create more units of student housing? We are facing a crisis, so I think we need to look at our laws and see how we can better facilitate student housing. The city also has financial resources through our Housing Trust Fund to help fund additional student housing. And for example, the Berkeley Student Cooperative would be a nonprofit organization that would be eligible for funding. And they have some of the most affordable housing for students off campus. So I think there are a number of ways that we can go about doing this. We're looking at certain strategies, such as how we can change the zoning in the Telegraph area to increase densities to allow the construction of more student housing. There are some other approaches that we'll be discussing as well. So I think there are opportunities for partnership in this area. Yes.
Yes, my question concerns the investment from Wells Fargo. What is the progress of that, and when will it be on the agenda again?
It is on the agenda for this upcoming council meeting next Tuesday, April 25th. And right now our contract is set to expire on May 31st. 5 years ago, I was the council member that pushed for divestment from Wells Fargo. And unfortunately, the previous council majority felt we should continue the contract with Wells Fargo. So we have a choice to make. And we need to do it in a way that protects the city's finances. But I want to find a way for us to divest within 1 year from Wells Fargo. We're already beginning to move certain accounts from Wells Fargo, our credit cards, our armored car services, and we're looking at how we can actually expedite moving the actual banking services from Wells Fargo due to the many reasons that we talked about. So I actually think now it's going to happen. We have a majority of the city council that's committed to this. Wells Fargo is pleading with us to continue banking with them. But I think this is one way that we can provide leadership, making sure that we're investing taxpayer dollars in a way that's socially responsible, and that we're not supporting investments that are contrary to our community's values. And I'm committed to that.
Thank you, Mayor. The federal government has deleted the word climate change from its vocabulary. What do you plan to do at the city level, and how much do you believe you can do in such a hostile environment?
It's a great question. The cuts to the EPA, the cuts in clean energy funding are really troubling. And I was actually at the Berkeley lab on Inauguration Day, meeting with the lab director and taking a tour of some of the energy efficiency and clean energy initiatives they're engaged in. And it was much better to be up there than be watching President Trump getting sworn in on TV. And Berkeley has historically been a leader on environmental issues. And we were one of the first cities to pass a climate action plan. We have been at the forefront of pushing initiatives on renewable energy, particularly on zero waste. And there's a lot more that Berkeley can do. So part of this is how can we make our homes and our new construction and even city buildings more energy efficient. One of the initiatives that's actually starting next year, which is very exciting, is Alameda County will be starting a community choice aggregation authority. And so what this means is this will be an alternative to PG&E to provide local power that will be derived from renewable sources. And I'm on the governing board of the Joint Powers Authority that runs the CCA. We will be the biggest CCA in California. And one critical component of this is a local build component, meaning creating actual solar arrays and actual energy infrastructure in Alameda County to help actually provide clean power to the residents of Alameda County. And I want to take that and actually create microgrids throughout the city of Berkeley to actually not only feed into the CCA, but to actually provide clean electricity to neighborhoods in the city of Berkeley. We're engaged in a partnership with the lab to create a municipal microgrid that will connect some of our municipal buildings to provide that sort of energy loop, that energy infrastructure. And I think that's something that could be expanded on a neighborhood basis. So that's one idea. How can we expand access to clean energy and local energy independence and resiliency, particularly in the event of a natural disaster? We know we straddle the Hayward Faults. We know we're prone to other natural disasters. So how will we be resilient? How will we be prepared as a community? There's a lot more we can do in zero waste, such as banning certain types of plastics from entering the landfill, expanding our recycling initiatives. Those are things we're exploring as well. So I think there's a lot that can be done, not just in terms of creating transit-oriented development, expanding transportation opportunities, really expanding our bicycle infrastructure to really make Berkeley a bike-friendly city. Copenhagen and many international cities are much more bike-friendly. And as a bicyclist myself, I certainly know that some of our streets are pretty riddled with potholes and very unsafe for bicyclists. So Berkeley will be voting on a bicycle plan on May 2nd. And I want to see us expand bicycle boulevards, expand protected bicycle lanes throughout the city of Berkeley, so we can make bicycling, walking, and transit accessible and preferred modes of transportation in our city, so we can reduce our carbon footprint. So I think there are a number of things we can do. We're always looking to best practices. I think California as well has a particular responsibility in light of the federal administration, and our governor has really been outspoken about continuing to lead in the area of fighting climate change and promoting renewable energy. And I think California is going to have to step up and provide some of the financial resources if we're going to see cuts in federal grants to that type of research and that type of investment. But what can we do on a local level to not just create that infrastructure, to create that source of power, to reduce our carbon footprint? So I think there's a lot we can do. And I'm very committed to addressing those issues. Issues of protests and homelessness have kind of taken center stage over the past few months, but continuing to make Berkeley a leader on climate change and sustainability are definitely some of my top priorities as mayor. Ma'am.
People's Park, what are your thoughts?
So, good question. In my first meeting with Chancellor Dirks, we talked about the need for student housing, and we talked about a number of sites that the university owns where they were exploring the construction of student housing. And one of those sites was People's Park. And what I said to the chancellor and Chancellor-designate Chris was, let's take that up. Let's take that off the back burner. And there are many other sites that have been identified that would be less controversial and would be appropriate to construct student housing. Ellsworth and Channing, the tennis courts and parking lot right there, is a more appropriate location for student housing. Since that time, the task force report was released, which talked about People's Park as a location for the construction of student housing. We need to preserve the history of People's Park in whatever is done. I will say that I do believe that, part of the park is open space and part of the park provides shelter and services for the homeless. So the idea of actually having permanent supportive housing on some portion of the park makes actual sense to me. But it needs to be done in a way that engages the campus community, the merchants, and other park stakeholders. We just can't be making decisions on this piece of property without getting input. We've seen the outcome of that, in the past when the university, put tennis courts in and put a parking lot in. The response of the community was very negative to that. But I do think the idea of having some permanent supportive housing for the homeless is worth considering. It could be an opportunity for a partnership between the city and the university, the School of Social Welfare. So one of the things that we're working on with the university is the university will be providing a social worker that will be doing direct outreach in People's Park and working with the city of Berkeley, connecting people to services and housing. And one of the things I'm committed to doing as mayor, and I didn't touch upon this earlier, is far too long the city of Berkeley and the campus have had a very tenuous relationship. Part of it is because the university is not an island. We have a city around it, and so the university needs to be a good neighbor and has made certain decisions that have not taken into consideration the needs and concerns of the city around it. But from my perspective, as a recent graduate of this university, as someone who loves this university, I want to strengthen the relationship and partnership with the city and the university. I think there's an enormous amount of opportunity to partner with various colleges in the university to help in some of the policy research and policy initiatives the city's involved in, and we're doing some of that in terms of homelessness with the school's social welfare, to work with the School of Education to help address our achievement gaps. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to strengthen the partnership between the city and the university, and the new chancellor provides an opportunity to help foster that new relationship. But one issue that we do have to address is the fact that the university, while it is an incredible engine of economic opportunity and provides a lot of jobs for the city, it does create impacts on the city in our roads, on our infrastructure, in terms of housing. And so I also do believe that the university should contribute more to the city of Berkeley to address the impacts it provides on our city. And so that's a conversation we'll also be having with the new chancellor in the coming months.
Thank you
Yes.
for coming to speak with us. I wanted to ask you a question about your speech. And every public office has its own restraints, whether they're financial or legislative. But your voice as our mayor is something that has its constraints and that depend on kind of the person who is in office. And as a person who is elected to be our voice, to be the voice of Berkeley, how seriously do you take that voice? And what do you think are its limits in denouncing policies that are either statewide or are nationwide? And how effective do you think that voice is?
Well, I take that voice and that responsibility very seriously. And you never know what you get yourself into until you're in the middle of it. And running for mayor and being mayor at a time where we have a national administration that is really challenging the rights of people and the values that this community believes in has been something that has been challenging, but also is an opportunity, I think, for Berkeley to lead. And Berkeley has historically been a voice and has been a leader for progressive change and for social action, not just on the campus, but off campus. I think we have a responsibility to do so. And so I believe I have a responsibility as mayor of the city to not only speak to the values of our community, but to also push for policies that can help address broader national challenges and address the challenges right here in our own community. So I take that responsibility very seriously. And I will say that certainly speaking out about the president and his policies takes great risk too. Based on some of the things I've said, I've received death threats. Every single day we receive hate mail. But we're not going to back down. We're going to continue to speak out and continue to fight for Berkeley values. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to ask you about rent control. Annual rent adjustment
Yes.
that can be overridden by a vacancy and
Decontrol, yes.
decontrol, right? And then vacant unit can be rented for market rate.
Yes.
That has been the case for, I guess, a couple of decades, maybe.
Couple of
that
decades, yeah.
really drives up the rent.
Yes.
Can this be undone? That's my question.
Good question. There is an effort now in the state legislature, a bill AB 1506, authored by Assembly Members Bloom from Santa Monica and Bonta from Oakland, to repeal Casa Hawkins, that law that was passed in the 90s, about 20 years ago, which basically gutted strong rent control throughout the state of California and meant that whenever a new tenant moves in, the owner can increase the rent to whatever the market will bear. So within just, I think it was a 3-year period from the implementation of Casa Hawkins, rents increased by 150% in the city of Berkeley. When the average market rent before Casa Hawkins was roughly $700 to $800 a month, now it's $2,300 a month for older housing and $3,500 for new construction. It just shows that something needs to be fixed. And whether it's a repeal, which I support, or whether it's even just fixing the law to cap the amount of the annual vacancy increase that's allowed on new tenancy, that would go a long way to address the issue. So I think that issue, that law, Casa Hawkins, and the fact that we haven't built enough supply to keep up with the demand, and now we're in a crisis, and we're not going to be able to, unfortunately, build enough to at the current time bring down market rents. I think those are some of the main factors that have resulted in our affordability crisis. So we need to do several things. We need to fight to repeal Casa Hawkins or amend Casa Hawkins. We need to create more housing that's particularly affordable at a variety of income levels. And one particular demographic that has not really been served by housing that's been constructed is people at the more middle income range. Teachers, professionals. And so one of the things we're exploring is actually crafting policies through our inclusionary zoning to require, incentivize the creation of middle income housing for teachers and other workforce populations. We're also going to be working with the Berkeley Unified School District to explore a joint proposal to create teacher housing. And so that's something that we're engaged in conversations about right now. So there's a lot that we can do. But key to this is not just building more, but preventing displacement. And that's another thing we're exploring in terms of how we can expand resources for when tenants are facing eviction so they can defend their evictions, how we can provide emergency rental assistance so people can stay housed. So certainly my administration, and I think the new council, is very committed to addressing the affordability and displacement crisis on a variety of levels. Sir.
And follow up on that, your discussion on housing. What's your sense? We moved here 8 months ago to Berkeley and had a hard time finding housing, went through Airbnb at first. How do you see Airbnb affecting this market in terms of? Well,
we have over 1,000 short-term rentals that have been identified in the city of Berkeley. And it's a mix of housing. Some of it are, second units or backyard cottages. And some of it is actual whole apartments or buildings that have been converted to short-term rentals. And there have been a number of properties that have been identified where rental housing has been used as short-term rentals, meaning that units are kept vacant and they're basically used as hotel rooms. And the Berkeley City Council has been discussing this issue for many months. And we just adopted a new ordinance around short-term rentals that legalizes short-term rentals. Prior to this legislation, it actually technically wasn't legal for people to do short-term rentals in the city of Berkeley. And so we've legalized short-term rentals, but we have policies to prohibit the conversion of long-term housing to short-term rentals. And we've seen this issue in San Francisco where thousands of units have been taken off the market because it's actually quite lucrative to rent your apartment as a short-term rental as opposed to a long-term rental. And in the city of Berkeley and in San Francisco, that means you're not subject to rent control. So you don't have a tenant there, they're not stuck there, you don't have to deal with the impacts of rent control. So it is actually quite lucrative, and we've seen a lot of apartments in the city of Berkeley that have been used as short-term rentals. So our policy actually prohibits long-term rentals from being used as short-term rentals. It prohibits newly constructed accessory dwelling units from being used as short-term rentals. We just passed, the past couple of years, laws to liberalize the construction of accessory dwelling units because we believe that's a more affordable way of creating housing and increasing density in neighborhoods. And we don't want that housing that's being created to then be used as short-term rentals, thus reducing the availability of housing for students and other people that need affordable housing in our community. So this policy that we just adopted balances those two competing interests. We want to facilitate this new economy. There are many long-term residents in our city that use Airbnb or Flipkey or HomeAway as a way to make additional income to pay off their mortgage, to use units that are not currently being used. We want to allow that. but at the same time, we need to preserve our housing stock. So the new law that we just passed balances those two things. Enforcement will be key, and we're now working on the implementation of that law. But it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. And we need to do everything we can to preserve existing housing so that because we're in a crisis, we need as much housing as possible, particularly housing that's more affordable. And we need to create housing that's affordable for people at a variety of income levels. And the affordability crisis is honestly one of the main reasons I ran for mayor. Going throughout our city, hearing of people that are being displaced, seeing the changes throughout our city. South Berkeley, for example, was a neighborhood that was predominantly African American. It has changed dramatically. Our African American population went from roughly 30% in 1970 now down to 8%. So just as an example of the effect of our economic crisis and our housing crisis on the diversity of our city. And I think one of the things that really makes Berkeley an incredible community is our diversity. It leads to innovation. It leads to arts. It leads to culture. But when artists and teachers and working families, students and other long-term residents can't afford to live here because housing is so expensive, we have a problem. And so I'm committed, my administration is very committed to working to address this affordability crisis and preserve rental housing. And I'll take one more question, if that's okay.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us today. We're very lucky to have a mayor like you in a time like this. So my question is kind of regarding the events of this past Saturday and some events before that. It was very troubling for a lot of us to see violent conflict, on both sides, but specifically fascist demonstrators in our streets, and we think that's like a really big threat to public safety. Yeah. So we were wondering how you would propose combating hate speech in public spaces in Berkeley. We are in the Free Speech Cafe, and they often hide behind the guise of free speech, so that's
It's a good question, and this has been on my mind the last several months and certainly the last several days. And definitely one of the challenges we're facing right now in this community. This all really started when Milo Yiannopoulos was invited by the Berkeley College Republicans to speak on this campus. And they certainly knew, the BCR knew, that doing so was going to be controversial. That being said, it does not justify the type of response that we saw to his invitation to campus, where people were using black bloc tactics, were shooting fireworks at police, were damaging property on and off campus, were engaging in violence. And unfortunately, both sides, the alt-right, I guess they characterize themselves, and the very radical sort of anarchist Antifa sort of group have kind of come to a head and have been coming into the city of Berkeley when protests have happened to fight. And, it is incredibly troubling to see violence happen in our city. But at the same time, it's violence that's actually occurring between people that are intending to fight each other. And they're coming ready to fight. They come with helmets, with shields, with weapons. This past Saturday, we actually implemented a number of new strategies to respond, such as setting up a fence around Civic Center Park so that people can only enter and exit certain locations, confiscating weapons, responding when people committed violence and immediately arresting them. We made 20 arrests. So there's no simple solution to this challenge. As I mentioned, groups have decided to make an example of Berkeley and test our boundaries of freedom of speech. Hate speech I don't believe is free speech. Violence is not free speech. Vandalism is not free speech. But, where do we draw the line? And as much as I disagree with President Trump and with fascists or Nazis or racists or alt-right people and the views that they express, I don't believe it's appropriate for me as a public official to say that they can't be heard. But when it goes from being a protest, a peaceful protest, to violence, that's different. That's when we have to intervene. That's when we have to protect public safety. That's when we have to protect property. So we're learning after all these different situations about how to respond, how to protect public safety, how to protect property. We can't literally build a wall around our city and say, you can't come in. We also can't really profile people on the basis of flags, Trump flags that they bring or signs that they bring in. That's not appropriate either. Does that really speak to the values of our community? So it's challenging because as much as I disagree with what Milo Yiannopoulos says or Ann Coulter says, if we really believe in freedom of speech, we need to allow them to be heard. But at the same time, we need to be prepared to make sure that things don't escalate to violence. And that's the challenge that we're facing. We have not seen this kind of violence in protests ever before in the city of Berkeley. Oftentimes, protests do involve civil disobedience, but not violence. And what we saw Saturday was really kind of a melee. And but we did intervene. We did make arrests. We will continue to intervene and make arrests and hold people accountable and prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. Public safety is our top priority, the health and safety of residents and the safety of property. And that actually, I think, takes precedence over freedom of speech.
Well, with that, can we give Mayor Arreguin a round of applause for speaking? Thank you.